Hi, everyone, and welcome back. Quite likely to a couple of places. You might be listening to this on the Beyond Body podcast or catching the video version of it on the What Mia Did Next channel. Whenever we have a chat like today, and particularly a guest like our guest today, I like to make these as available in as many places for as many people as possible. We have Carolyn Costin returning for the third time, which is such an enormous honor. And selfishly, I will take any chance I can get to have a chat to Carolyn. So I got something out of it, and I hope that you do too. I wanted to have Carolyn on to talk about the power of lived experience within eating disorder treatment and obviously awareness as well. For those not aware, which I'm sure most of you are, Carolyn is an expert and giant in the field of eating disorder recovery. She founded Montanito, a residential facility in America, and that model of care is the basis of our very first residential facility in Australia, Wandanerida, located in Queensland. Carolyn is training therapists and coaches to go out in the field and work with clients directly. And that's where Carolyn started, as a therapist. But what made Carolyn different was that she self-disclosed as a recovered individual who had suffered from an eating disorder and worked that into her treatment approach with clients. This was not happening back when Carolyn was first entering the field, and she has continued to not just utilize for her own practice, but as part of her training for other professionals in a very considered and responsible and safe way, been able to maximize the power of lived experience. So obviously Carolyn is the person to talk to when it comes to how lived experience is shaking up the treatment sphere and what an enormous difference it is making on an individual, but also on a systemic level. I hope that you get so much out of today's chat. You may be able to hear right now in the background a low hum from some road work that has been incessant for the last 3 days, but hey, I'm happy to not lose a tire to a pothole at the end of our street, so I'm not complaining too much. But I do apologize if you can hear a bit of a gentle hum in the background throughout our chat. Please come and give us a follow over on the podcast, subscribe on the channel. So happy to be back chatting to you all, sharing this, endless wisdom of Carolyn. And I will see you back here very, very soon. So Carolyn, thank you so much for coming back to the channel/podcast. We obviously pop this out in a couple of different spots so people can make the most of your time and your wisdom, which you're so generously sharing with us again today. Just as a bit of background, obviously you've shared that in your own practice as a therapist, you started using your own lived experience with your eating disorder in your interactions with clients, which was certainly not something that was very commonly done back then, more so now. What helped you to discover that this was something that was valuable in your work with clients, disclosing your own personal experience?
Well, it's so interesting. And in some ways, I think it'll be helpful, but maybe in a different way than you think. I never even thought about not doing it. It didn't even occur to me not to share it. Mm-hmm. To me, it's sort of like, I've made this analogy before. If I was hit by lightning and I'm a therapist and a client comes to see me who got hit by lightning, why would I not share, right? It felt so rare at the time too, to meet somebody else who had an eating disorder. And it just felt like there's a familiar, we might have different experiences, but so much is the same. There are so many things that just starting to ask questions that the person had never been asked before. And after I did it the first time, I was a little nervous the first time someone sent me somebody and said, okay, there's somebody and she has that thing you had. Yeah. And could you help her? And I was a little bit nervous because I didn't know how it was going to go. But once in the room with her, there was no way, and so then people just started referring to me, and I thought, look, I got to ask them the questions like, what do you feel guilty about eating? And I would give people journals and say, write down what you're eating and circle all the things you throw up. And people were like, no one's ever asked me those questions. I said, well, those are the things that we need to work on. Those are the behaviors. And at that time, people were doing more of the kind of therapy like, we'll talk about your mother, and we'll talk about your relationship with your father, or, you know, you had a bad childhood, but they weren't really talking about the specific behaviors, the rituals, cutting up food into bits, none of that stuff. And so I felt like I just had to start asking. And when I started helping people literally change their behaviors, I never looked back, you know?
Yeah. What impact did you see it have if there was a contrast between, you know, disclosing and not disclosing? What reaction did you get from clients to indicate like this is the way to go? This is
You
clearly
know,
opening up a level of trust, or whatever the reaction was.
I think the main thing was people felt understood. That was the
Mm,
very first thing. They felt understood and not shamed, you know, because I could talk about lying about what I had eaten and, you know, hiding it or hiding the amount of exercise I had done. I could share things that took some of the shame away. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is hope, because I think they could see that I was eating freely. I would bring cookies into the session, you know, and have
yeah.
the cookies sitting on the desk. And I would just wait and see what they said. And after a few minutes, I would say, okay, tell me all the things that you've been thinking about the cookies sitting there that you haven't said, you
Mm,
know?
mm,
And then they say, oh my God, I thought, is she going to make me eat those? Is she going to eat one? How many of them am I going to have to eat? Am I going to be able to get rid of it? And I said, see, all that stuff is going on in your brain while we're trying to have a normal conversation.
yeah.
That's like the eating disorder self there, you know, that kind of stuff. And then I
Yeah.
would eat the cookie, even if they didn't. And so I think them seeing that I was, certainly I was normal weight by then. And so them knowing that I had been seriously underweight, now I was normal weight, I was eating things in front of them. I think people needed to see that you could be so, your brain could be so hijacked, and yet you can recover. You can get
Mm,
over this. This is
mm,
not going to be the way you have to stay. I
yeah.
think so. Understanding, less shame, and hope
Yeah.
that being recovered is real.
Yes.
And I
I
couldn't imagine not doing it.
yeah.
You know,
Just felt instinctive. Yeah. I always draw a little bit of a comparison between eating disorders and recovery, and getting people out of cults, like deprogramming them.
yes,
Um,
yeah,
because very often, like, there's that wonderful cult expert, Steve Hassan, and he was a Moonie, and he's, you know, he's got a doctorate, and he has worked with families to deprogram their loved ones. And it's very much because of his lived experience that he is able to
yeah,
reach people versus someone who's maybe just coming at it clinically, or coming at it from just, you know, a really cold kind of expert level. There's that lived experience and that ability to see those similarities and get your foot in the door that way, and then wedge it open and wedge it open. And I see
yes,
such a similarity to someone with lived experience just being able to put that foot in the door and have that connection and that similarity, that then you can start to show them, and, you know, I experienced this and this is how I overcame it, or I had the same anxiety, or I had the same belief, but if you think about it this way, and just being able to start
yeah.
pivoting them away from eating disorder and more so towards some of those healthy self kind of instincts.
Yeah, I think it's you knowing how they think,
Mm,
knowing how the brain gets hijacked. And it's funny you say that, because I used to have someone like that come in and talk when I ran residential treatment.
yeah.
I used to have invite different specialists in, like deprogrammers,
Yeah.
you know, deception people, come in and talk to the clients about that, because
Mm,
that is what happens. You know, your brain does get hijacked. And when my very first book I wrote, I talked about feeling like that I was brainwashed, but I had brainwashed myself. So that was even harder, you know?
mm, mm.
And so to back out of it, I think you need to, yeah, you need to kind of understand. Now, that doesn't mean that someone who's not recovered can't be a good therapist. I've had great therapists, but I do think, and I really push now, that that anybody who's trying to get over an eating disorder needs exposure to people who are recovered
Mm,
in one way or another. I used to not be so pushy about it, because I was out there and people were very, look, it was hard for me. I did what I thought was right. I
mm,
stood up at the first international conference about 30 some years ago and said, I'm recovered, you can be recovered. But it was hard. There were people in the field over here who, top people in the field who would come to me and say, Carolyn, do you want to be known as a good therapist or as a recovered anorexic? And I was like, and then I thought to myself, why can't I be both?
Are the two mutually exclusive? Like,
yeah, yeah. And still here, there are treatment centers that hire people who are recovered. Like they won't discriminate and not hire you now, which some places still do that, but you can't talk about it. And for me, I'm saying that you're acting like it's shameful that these people had it. And what kind of message is that sending to your clients,
Yes.
Anyway. So now I'm bolder about it,
Yeah. I think that that's been certainly something which I've seen change in the last few years in particular. But this sense of skepticism, I guess, when you're speaking about recovery or being recovered or whatever it might be, I always felt like I was being looked at with suspicion. Like, not that I was being deceptive, but, that I was always kind of on the brink of, is she going to, relapse, and people looking out for things, and even videos that I would put up. Whereas I think because awareness has progressed so much in such a short space of time, and we're seeing so many more examples of lived experience and being fully recovered and recovery, that suspicion has, I think, decreased. But
I think it's decreased, but I think there's some substance to it, which is why, as you know, I'm very particular about who I train. You have to declare that you are recovered for 2 years and that you meet my definition of recovered, because I think people who go through this sometimes want to give back before they have reached that fully recovered state. And I think you can get triggered and all that. So I do think that there was some, there was certainly some fear of being misplaced. I think some professionals had fear about being misplaced in some ways, but I also think there was some legitimate, like, what if the person relapses, or what if the person is really sick? So this is where now I think the strongest thing I need to be promoting is good training. You have to have good training. You have to be recovered for 2 years. You have to have an internship with supervision. I'm really strong about that, because if we don't do that, then we're going to be putting people in a position that's not fair to them or their clients,
Yeah, and continued training as well. And I think that's the other really important thing about what is imparted to you by CCI throughout the course is that, if somebody working in the space does relapse, then there's no shame in that, they're encouraged to get in contact, and that there's a safe place to go to, that you don't have to hide it or sort of disappear, that you can, go somewhere where you're not going to be shamed or judged for relapsing or whatever the situation might be. But I think you've mentioned that, even in your time running Montanito, that was a real rarity to have somebody.
It was rare just because I had the 2-year rule. I think if someone says I'm recovered, then I say, okay, well, you still got 2 years. And if you go for 2 years, a lot of stuff can happen in 2 years. A boyfriend breakup, you can smash your car, a relative dies, COVID happens.
Yeah.
In 2 years, there's going to be enough stress that if something was going to send you back, you probably would have already slipped up. So that was my benchmark. And it really worked. In 22 years of running residential and day treatment programs, I only had it happen one time that I had to pull them off and send them to treatment, get them help. No shaming though, because I wouldn't want any client of mine to have that problem. I mean, if a client has a relapse, we want them to feel like they can get help for it. So we have to take care of our own too,
Yeah. And the lived experience piece is obviously so important, because obviously, there's the aspect of obviously having coaches out there who are using their lived experience, etc. And there's also the fully recovered sort of awareness that is building, that, it is possible to be fully recovered. What impact do you see from your end as far as when people are introduced to this idea of, being fully recovered and having examples out there, what difference do you think that makes in someone's treatment? Not just to be told it's possible, but to, see all these examples within, whether it's their professionals or it's advocacy or it's awareness spaces. What do you think that means to the individual?
Well, I think it's huge, because the other side of it is that you'll always be recovering for the rest of your life. Or the new one became, it's in your genes, so it's genetic, so you're not going to get over it. And I had clients say to me, oh, well, I know it's genetic, so why bother?
Yes.
And people would say, oh, if we show people it's genetic, it takes away the stigma. No, actually, no, it doesn't, because they're thinking they can't get over it. I think that people feel like, if I have to manage this for the rest of my life, which is what happened when I saw these clients from Australia.
Yes.
I was getting all these clients who came from Australia, and what they were saying to me is, I've been told I just have to learn how to manage my illness. And I went, oh, wow. Well, that's kind of depressing. I'm not managing my illness. It's a thing of the past. It's gone. And you can have that too. And that was one of the reasons I ended up, it's a whole long story, but Butterfly had me come over and travel around Australia. And, that changed the course of things, because I had people lining up wanting to talk to me, because, like I said before, it's hopeful. People, I don't know what would have happened if I had gone through treatment and people said, you're going to have this for the rest of your life.
Yes.
I think I would have just, felt a little bit like throwing in the towel. I don't believe that. Now, not everybody does become recovered. I'm not, such an idiot that I'm going to say everybody's going to make it. Everybody doesn't make it. Not everybody has the same resources,
And statistically, I don't think that could be said of any physical or mental illness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But everybody who walks through my door or these days gets on my Zoom, everybody I treat with the idea, I could do it, so you could do it.
Yeah.
So let's go. Yeah. And there's a pathway forward, and there are ways, and it's all about strengthening that healthy person in there. Because, after working with people, everybody inside has a healthy self in there. It's in there, and they'll bring it out for other people. Like women who can feed their kids a proper meal, but don't feed themselves. What is that? And you work really hard to get in and find that part of them that knows the truth, that knows the answer, but isn't applying it to themselves.
Yeah.
That I think, that was another key, because I don't start fighting with the eating disorder. I start aligning with the healthy part, that's there, that is in there.
Yeah. And I think that, helping people to understand that full recovery is an option, it is something which exists and is possible, is so, so important, because like you said, it just seems like a really bad deal otherwise. It seems like a whole lot of work. I always say to people, like, why would you pay full price for half the product? Like, that just seems like such a ripoff. And for me, and I've, shared this with you a few times, that, I was a couple of years in living underneath that rhetoric that this is going to be forever and this is like AA, this is something you maintain and manage, and that I had really been just kind of going through the motions of what I had been doing the last couple of years, because that's what I thought I had to do. But really mentally, had probably been fully recovered for some time, and it prevented me, once I came across your philosophy and for recovery, it really probably saved me from, falling backwards into a relapse. And I think that it's so important, particularly within treatment spaces, because we see it here in Australia. It's something we're actively working on, this revolving door of people going into hospital settings, this revolving door of people going into treatment. And I say to clients all the time, love working with you, want to get to the point where I never see you again. Unless we catch up.
That should be our job, is to put ourselves out of business with every client. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm still astonished that this argument is still going on. I think the whole thing about lived experience, and the more people, now we have volumes.
Yes.
In the beginning, I was standing up saying I'm recovered. And then it was a few people that I treated. Then it was a few people here and there. There's so many people now saying it that it gets harder and harder to ignore. Yeah. But I also think we have to distinguish the difference between people with lived experience who become peer mentors. And to me, that's people who, volunteer, they work for free, they do support groups, they do mentoring, but they're not trained like coaches. Coaches
Yes.
is a whole different level where you're trained to have meals with people, to go into their homes, there's, and the I don't want this to be an advertisement for the coaching thing, my coaching thing, but I think anybody who's going to train coaches has to take them through a program that takes a long time, like not a 2-week course, but a year long with supervision and all that, because I think that's the way that it's going to make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Bit of a side note. I wanted to ask you this because, I've been sort of in the advocacy space for almost a decade and talking about being fully recovered, the last however many years. And when I met with that skepticism, I take it less personally now, but that skepticism really used to get to me. Did you ever go through a period where you'd get sort of like the raised eyebrow or the like, oh, really? And it was sort of, it felt,
Oh yeah.
after all the hard work you've done to fully recover, and then people are like, oh, really?
Yeah, I've had it in different ways throughout, because this has been going on for me. I've been in the field now 40 years, and
Yeah.
I so this has been, God, it makes me feel so old. But
No.
I had people, I would stand up and give a talk, and then afterwards go to the conference meal, let's say. And I don't like chocolate. And I know that's a weird thing, but I don't like chocolate. So
everyone's
chocolate
got their
cake.
thing. I don't like chocolate cake. I get it. I hear you.
Okay, so chocolate cake is served at the dessert, for the dessert, and I don't eat it. And all of a sudden there's a buzz all around the conference. Oh, Carolyn isn't eating her chocolate cake, like somebody else who says they don't like chocolate can do that, but not me, So I dealt with a lot of that.
Yeah.
But I actually feel like I was so solid. I knew I was recovered. I didn't at all feel I never felt like my recovery was in jeopardy because of what other people said, which was good. But I did get a little too defensive. I remember one time someone said, someone in the field, known person in the field, sent me a note after I gave a lecture and saying, people are saying they think you lost weight, and, you look kind of thin. And so I took a picture of myself and wrote my weight and BMI and sent it to him. Now, that was probably stupid, but I felt defensive.
I feel it though, Carolyn. I feel that reaction.
Yeah. But, I think, and the other thing is, I've treated all kinds of eating disorders and all kinds of cultural diversity and everything. And there's also this thing about being a white, thin, cisgender person. And I get it. I'm trying to get other people in the field. I gave scholarships when Black Lives Matter was happening, to get some people, some more diversity on the coaches board. But, we have that to face too, and we just have to own it and understand it and know where that's coming from, and try to help make the field be more diverse and help people get the treatment they need, whatever size they are, whatever eating disorder they have, whatever culture or gender, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I came into the field where that definitely wasn't going on, you know?
Yeah, that diversity within lived experience is something which I think the internet and social media has helped with enormously, is, seeing all these, different representations that otherwise, the media wasn't highlighting, or, like all these funnel systems that, we weren't seeing that much diversity. But that was just wanted to ask you that, because I had a similar realization where I used to get quite defensive about, the raised eyebrow about full recovery. And I think it's another level of confidence in your full recovery when you can just kind of go, when you get there, come back and talk to me and tell me about whether or not you think it's possible, right? It's, it's something that people have to experience themselves to really fully understand, what it is and how it feels. Also wanted to ask you on that topic, because obviously coaching and what you're doing with CCI is so relevant to lived experience, because what percentage of your coaches, it's something like above 95% have lived experience. Is that right?
Yeah. And the ones who don't, have some close relationship,
Yes.
Have a family member or worked in, most of them I think will have a family member, a sister, a child. I do extensive interviews with people who have a child, though, because I don't think a mom who has a child with an eating disorder is necessarily going to be the best coach.
Yeah.
But some of them have, but some of them, it's just hard because the daughter might be resentful if the mom's doing it. So I try to make sure that the mom and daughter talk it out. If it is a daughter, son, whatever, has to be okay with it. But it's interesting. Yeah. Over 95%. I don't know exactly what the percent is of people who apply to become CCI coaches have lived experience, and the ones who don't, almost always, I think, I'm trying to think of an exception, have some kind of relationship close with somebody who they feel like, now I want to go on and help other people.
Yeah, which I think is so beautiful about, it's what I love the most about this space. I was at, we were chatting before we started recording. I was at a lunch with Butterfly with some potential donors last week. And we've had a series of these lunches. And the thing it always comes back to when I'm trying, because obviously we've got so much not great stuff to share with them, 37 public hospital beds nationally, 1 residential facility, please help us. But the thing I always leave with them is that this population is so worth investing in, because in the, almost decade that I've just been floating around the space, more than any other sort of mental health concern, when you invest in people to reach their own state of recovery or being fully recovered, the number of people who then are inspired to give back, whether they become coaches or dietitians, psychologists, mental health nurses, advocates, whatever it is, I think that's where that as complicated as eating disorders are and how hard it can be to raise awareness, that's the thing that people get. That, people really use their experience and are so motivated to either give back what they were given or to go back and fill what wasn't given to them, maybe what was missing in the system, which I think is just such a beautiful part of this space.
And it's one of the inspiring things, right? You were saying about what does lived experience bring to the client, that when the clients can see, sometimes they say, I want to do that. I want to get better so I can do that, so I can help other people,
Yeah, because I think about your ripple effect, which is just so endless and has, not only directly impacted whether or not people recovered, but then people becoming therapists and people becoming coaches. And then, I've just hired somebody in Belgium who used to watch my channel when she was going through recovery, and she heard about coaching through us chatting about it on my channel. And then who knows what that ongoing ripple effect.
I know. Yeah. It's lovely for me to see that happening,
Yeah.
And what I really hope is that for, most of all, it's inspiring for other people, because I can't even tell you how many clients over my lifetime I've met who then said to me, I've never met a recovered person.
Yes.
And by the way, this happened to me a lot when I was in Australia. Yeah. People would come up to me and say, and therapist would come up to me, a physician came up to me, students would come up to me and say, I haven't told anybody, doctors and therapists working in the field who said, you're so brave. And I went, oh, well, that brave thing has happened a long time ago. I was scared, but I just stood up. I always tell people, I started talking about it before I had the feeling that I wasn't supposed to talk about it. It was only after I was talking about it that people were trying to tell me, you sure you want to talk about that? Well, it's too late now. I think people need it to get better,
Yeah. Which is so part of the stigma. Like, why would you talk about it? It's like, well, why not? Let's have a conversation about why that would be shameful, or why that would be wrong, or why you wouldn't want to be associated with that. Because I know that you've said in one of our previous chats, your eating disorder was your greatest teacher, because recovery itself is such a huge accomplishment. It's not just an event, it's an accomplishment. It takes a lot of work.
Yeah. And you get so much stronger in so many places. Like I said, your healthy self, and recognizing that. And when you recognize and can strengthen that part of you, it's not like the critic goes away, you still have other things that will tell you, but it's not an eating disorder anymore, but it might say you're not good enough about this or that. And you still have to bring that other self forward and combat it. So I think you learn lifelong skills,
Yeah, absolutely. So within obviously the work that you've done to train therapists and obviously running Montenegro and having people with lived experience, working with clients and now coaches working with clients and that being a new area, uh, obviously people's lived experience can be so powerful in how they interact with their clients. But what do practitioners need to know about kind of the do's and don'ts, or how best to use their lived experience to benefit their clients? Are there particular
Such
things
a
they
good
should
question.
or shouldn't be doing?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I mean, there's a lot of guidelines, and I have 2 tracks in the course, and one track is for recovered people and another track is for people who never had an eating disorder. And still I teach them how to use, maybe they had depression or anxiety or got a divorce or whatever. And so there's a number of guidelines. I'll just tell you a few of them. You probably know them all, but anyway, one of
Good
them
to have a refresher.
okay, well, one of them is, you never talk about how awful the worst you were, the lowest weight you got to, how many laxatives you took, how many miles you ran, because that just fosters a competitive feeling with clients. There's no reason to do that. So that's one thing. Another thing is, you don't bring up things that are irrelevant to the case you're working on. So if you're working with someone who has restrictor anorexia nervosa, you don't have to start talking about how bad it was when you took laxatives, because if they never took laxatives, there's no reason for you to bring it up. So always make sure that your disclosures are related to the client that's in front of you. Otherwise, you might be putting ideas in their mind or whatever. The other thing that's super important is the line between, you never talk about underlying issues. You don't talk about their depression or their anxiety or their trauma or any of you don't even talk about the causes really for the eating disorder. You can listen a little bit, but your job is to deal with the here and now as a coach. I mean, you have your experience, you have experience. Maybe their relationship with their boyfriend is really bad and it makes them feel like purging, but you don't want to get into the relationship with the boyfriend and tell them how to deal with that. You want to say, but how does purging help that?
Yes.
Because it doesn't. And so what are you going to do instead of purge? You're going to text me, you're going to journal between your eating disorder self and your healthy self. You're going to reach out to a friend. Your job as a coach is to change that person's behaviors, not to get into because that's the job for a therapist, and it's just an inappropriate, and they're not trained to do it. And I think that's the thing missing too in a lot of the work that's done, is nobody is doing that with them.
Yeah, and I think it's so empowering as well, obviously, to have like the training and the backup and to have you there in the background, because it really gives you that confidence to rely on your lived experience and to use it, in somebody else's best interest, but to really have confidence in your own instinct. Like, I will say something to a client and I just see an eye movement and I'm like, I know exactly what that is. I know exactly what that thought is. I know, what the panic is or what the anxiety is. Yeah. Or being able to tell, because I used to do this with my psychologist, because as far as I knew, she didn't have a lived experience. It's not something she disclosed. I have no indication that she had a lived experience. There are things I didn't disclose because I was ashamed. I was ashamed of maybe something that was judgmental or that, was definitely not healthy, self-aligned. It may not have been a very kind thought. It might have been like a fairly fat phobic belief that I had, and I wouldn't share it so we could not deal with it. And I think these are things that probably took longer for me to resolve because I didn't feel like I could share it. So what I try to make clear to clients from the get-go is there's probably not a thought that you've had that I haven't had some version of that you can't share. There's not going to be judgment. There's not
something
going to be...
that was at least as bad.
Yeah. If you've been judgmental, I've likely had a similarly judgmental thought. And because they'll start the sentence with, this is so not me, and I'm so horrified that I think this, but, and it takes a little while to get it out of them. So being able to sit there, not only just to behaviorally say, I understand why you do this and this, and to be able to eat with them and do all of that stuff, but also just to cut through some of that shame of, we can't address it unless we're talking about it. And if you feel too ashamed to share it, then we're never going to get to, the real core of what eating disorder self is telling you or believing. And the lived experience
that's
is so
the key
powerful there. Yeah.
Well, that's the key right there, is that this philosophy that I came up with because of my own internal experience of trying to get better, this idea about eating disorder self and healthy self, it to me, one of the things that it does is it helps people come forward, because you know that, so your eating disorder self is saying that, but you would say something else to a friend. You would say something else to your own daughter. So it takes some of the responsibility from the person feeling so bad, because we say that is a part of you. It's not the same thing as saying like Ed, like in Life Without Ed. It's not saying it's external and it's out there, because that, I think, makes people often feel like they don't take responsibility. Ed made me do it, kind of thing. But I think when you say, but you have two parts of you, and those parts of you are at battle, So I can say to somebody, did your eating disorder, is it giving you a hard time right now? If we're sitting at a meal, I can say, is that voice in your head, yelling and screaming at you right now? Because it helps separate them, so they know they have these two parts, but they're still their own parts, but that they have to get them talking to each other. And therefore, I'm not doing all the work. You're not doing all the work. We get them to start doing the work, because that's the way you grow that healthy self stronger.
Yes. And I think that's part of that demonstration where it's less about taking the onus off the individual and setting up that treatment versus person sort of setup, and more so like, I'm not going to tell you, you're going to tell you, I'm just going to show you how to do it.
Yes, exactly. Because if we tell them all the time, they leave and they don't know how to do it. They haven't practiced. That's why I'm really big on that's why we ended up writing the workbook to go along with the 8 Keys book, because it's really important for people, get pen on paper, get down there and do those assignments, because it's your brain. And we have neuroplasticity. The brain's going to change. If your brain got hijacked, you can retrain it. We know that. But you have to work at it. I can't just put those things in there.
And I think that's where that demonstration, as someone who's gone through it, is so powerful, because there's a certain level to which they can't get away with stuff anymore. Like when they can come and say, my psychologist doesn't get it, or this person just doesn't get it. And I think with someone with lived experience, there's just a limit to how much they can claim you don't get it. Like, I can't respond to that, or I can't do that. And, that's impossible. And it's just something they can't quite, that's not going to fly to a certain extent, because they're sitting there with a demonstration in front of them. And as a coach, I'm always trying to introduce them to more and more people, so they can't say, well, maybe for you, but not for me. Well, yeah, but all these other people too. I'm not out here on an island by myself. I've got a lot of people reporting this.
Someone, I wrote an article, you probably haven't seen it, a long time ago, called Been There, Done That. And it was about hiring recovered people in the treatment center. And the guy who wrote it with me, Craig Johnson, has run some top eating disorder centers here. And he didn't used to hire people who are recovered, but, he came around, and one of the things he used to think, and he wrote about, was that this fear that people with eating disorders would have too much empathy, perhaps, and let clients get away with stuff. And he found out it's just the opposite. Because we have empathy, but we also are the first to call BS when someone says, oh, I can't, stop taking laxatives because this and that, or I can't and when there's enough of us who know better, who've done it, then it's harder for clients to say that. That's for sure.
Yeah, I had a client just last week saying, well, you don't eat breakfast every day. I was like, every day. No, not every day. Every day. I mean, it's my favorite meal of the day. I go to bed going like, and I'm going to have my chai, and I'm going to have, do I have peanut butter in the cupboard? Yep, I have that. All right. I'll get my news set up, half an hour of the news, get into my emails. Fabulous. Love that pocket of time. And they were just, and it was, but I can't because, yes, you can. Whatever time, but what if I wake up at 12 o'clock? That's still breakfast. I don't care if you wake up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
First meal, you're breaking your fast.
That's right. First meal is breakfast. And so it's all these little, this minutia and this, and my eating disorder did it, pulling you into the weeds of the detail. And I think when you have lived experience, you can pull them out of the weeds and show them that aerial view and go, big picture. Let's pull it back to big picture. I'm not getting into this little, back and forth with eating disorder self, because we're just going to spend the next hour arguing over what is breakfast in theory. Like, what's the philosophical definition of breakfast?
Yeah.
Rather than why aren't we having it? What's the fear of not having it?
That makes me think that in a way, what we can do, because you said about the weeds, is we know what rocks to look under,
Totally.
We know things where things are lurking and things are hiding. And the more we work with clients, the more we learn different ones,
Yeah.
But and I think being able to talk about it, I mean, people used to say to me, I feel like you got inside my brain.
Yeah.
And it was really just because I had all those thoughts, when we have the thought, going into a restaurant and opening the menu, what are all those weird thoughts that go on? Well, they go on with these guys, the people that we're seeing. And when we can say, okay, is this happening? Is that happening? I think it, like I said before, helps you feel understood. We can provide a new kind of role modeling for it, and then be models of what it's like coming out the other end.
Yes, absolutely.
Coming out the other end.
Yeah. And I think because so much of the fear for a lot of people, and I've seen this particularly because of COVID, people recovering in the time of COVID, there's an extra challenge in that they can't travel. They can't, go and do all these exciting bucket list things that they wanted to recover for, maybe, right? And so there's sort of this like, what was all this for? And so they're kind of clinging to that eating disorder identity or purpose or structure. And so to be then a role model, not only of like the eating of the food and the getting through the process, but then the forging of that healthy self-identity, which is less about like creating a new identity. It's just about pushing out the eating disorder self one and letting the healthy self one take up more space. But showing them what is possible on the other side, I think, is such a powerful piece of it. And that's where I see people's eyes light up in terms of like, that's what I want. I want to feel purposeful and creative and passionate and connected and present with my loved ones. And that's where you can really get them connected to the why, even if they haven't got it for themselves, just to see that could be my why. That could be possible.
Yeah, there's a little bit of I want what she's having,
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine how people do get better and do work in treatment centers where they don't have people who are recovered openly. I just can't imagine, because, people coming up to me and saying, I mean, the very first international lecture I gave some 35 years ago, whatever it was so interesting to have clinicians come up to me and say, as a clinician, I've never even met a patient who's recovered. How do you work as a doctor treating cancer if you've never had a patient who's recovered, right?
So true.
This was 35 years ago, but just push that out into treatment centers that aren't employing recovered people openly and having them working openly and showing people what it can be. I just think, for other illnesses, you can find it pretty easily, but it's less and less hard now. And people like you doing this kind of thing are making it become, especially in Australia. Australia is surpassing the United States in terms of its appreciation. This is my opinion. Appreciation for lived experience and getting people really doing things like you're doing, and the research now that Butterfly's doing, it's
Yeah.
really taking it up. And
Yes.
it's so exciting to see,
Yeah, absolutely. So just to round out, in terms of what you hope for, well, how you hope to see lived experience taking up more space in awareness and treatment centres, or just treatment spaces, whether it's outpatient, inpatient, whatever it is, where do you hope to see it going in terms of how it's trending? How would you hope to see it continue?
Well, you mean it Australia or everywhere?
Just everywhere. Let's
Oh
just keep it
boy.
super broad.
Well, I hope that these little bits, because now I'm in like CCI, not me, but the
Yep.
coaches that I've trained are in about 15 countries. And
Amazing.
so I think what's happening in those other countries is sort of the same thing that happened in Australia. I planted some seeds and it started to grow, and you guys took off. And
Yeah.
so in countries like South Africa, Dubai, Belgium, Peru, Spain, where they are still back in the kind of medical model where people either see an outpatient therapist or they end up in a hospital bed.
Mm.
That's kind of and that's what the United States was years ago when I started practicing, right? You could go see a therapist. If you got so bad, you ended up in a medical ward.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that maybe in planting these seeds, people, and this is how things change. They change from the patients and the parents. They don't necessarily change from the powers that be that are running everything.
Yeah.
What happened was parents are saying, I want to coach.
Yeah.
Clients are saying, patients are saying, I want to coach. And I think in these other countries, the same thing is starting to happen where people are saying, I get these letters from mostly moms, but sometimes dads or aunties. I have my niece or my daughter, whatever, and I saw a podcast. I saw Mia's podcast and I learned about coaching. Do you have a coach in my country? So I hope that what it does is to spur not just coaching itself, but people who have lived experience, for example, therapists who are working in those countries who have not talked about it.
Yes.
Because people were afraid, as I said before, people were afraid, oh, what if they relapse? What if they're not recovered enough? Well, listen, everybody, they're in there working. And if they aren't allowed to share it, then they can't get training for how best to use it. So when treatment centers used to say to me, oh, we don't hire recovered people, I would lean in and say, how do you know?
Yeah.
How do you know? Because they're
not
not
let them
telling you.
disclose it. Yeah.
Because I knew people who were working in those very treatment centers, but just weren't telling anybody. So if you have it be open and offer the training, then people know how to use their lived experience and not make the mistakes, because there are mistakes. You can't treat people exactly the same way that you were treated, because people are different. So not everybody got better the same way I did.
Yes.
And all those other things I listed about not sharing symptoms that they don't even have. I already went over it, but I think there's a good reason to believe that there's a lot of people working in the field who, and I think coaches coming out, and we're really open about it.
Yeah.
I think, and I was as a therapist anyway, but all these coaches being open about it, especially in other countries, I think it's going to help people with lived experience who are professionals talk about it more. That's what I think.
Yes. I have had, I had somebody sign up who's psychologist and dietitian both said you need a coach, and that wasn't the first time I'd heard that, whereas it is usually coming from the client who's requesting, I think instinctively, this is what I need. And now it's starting to go to that next level where I think that from a treatment perspective, it's starting to become apparent this has been a missing link. And I don't think it's just the coaching piece, which has been a hugely missing link, but it's the lived experience piece as well. Yeah. People want to see what's possible. They want hope.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I've actually had a few therapists and dietitians now say, I don't want to treat a client without a coach.
Yeah.
And that's like music to my heart, just because I
You're
know
right.
it's helpful.
Yeah.
I know it's helpful for them. I know it will help their business be a success. You can't be everywhere as a therapist. You can't go to restaurants with all your clients,
Yeah.
and you can't go to their homes and set up cooking or
Buy
be
a
on
pair
their
of
Zoom
jeans with
having.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't do it all. So
Exactly. Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. And like I've said to you, I have expressed this in, my awareness raising and advocacy stuff behind the scenes and publicly as well. I wouldn't be fully recovered if it weren't for you. I wouldn't be a CCI coach, certainly, if it weren't for you. There are clients who I now can proudly say are fully recovered and who have an interest in going into the field. I have coaches who, found coaching through my chats with you and who now work for me. So it's like this lived experience thing is not just important for the individual, it's in a systemic way. And
yeah,
I'm talking to the originator of it. Do you know what I mean? Nobody came to you with their lived experience, and now all over
that's
the world.
true. That's a good
It
point.
is the
That's a good
truth.
point.
I mean,
Yeah.
put it on a business card, Carolyn. It is absolutely the truth.
Okay, that's a good point.
And so I think that that alone, the power of that is just people at every level, client level, patient level, treatment level, providers. I think that it's the future. It's happening, but I think it's truly just going to go from strength to strength.
I'll tell you what, I'm glad that I'm alive. I didn't know I was going to see this happen in my lifetime.
Yeah.
I really had a vision that it was going to happen, but I didn't really know in my lifetime. And that's what I feel like now. And it's people like you who have the wide audience. I don't have the energy to do all these podcasts and everything. I'm trying to train the coaches. So I love it that you're out there, and people have found CCI through your podcast, several of them. So, and it's great that it comes back around to you and they can work for you and with you and all that. It's great.
It's unbelievable. Just so many full circles. It's beautiful. So, as always, thank you for your time, for your wisdom. It is always so lovely to chat to you. I hope we'll be able to do this sitting next to each other one day in a semi-post-COVID world.
Well, we think it's looking like Australia for me in February, March. I will definitely be in touch with you about it.
Fingers crossed. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Carolyn.
Thanks for having me. It's always so lovely. Thank you so much.